Welcome, everybody. This is Jarvis and Corey, God Every Moment, where we talk about faith, fitness, family, and finances. I have Corey here, and a quick rundown about Corey. Corey is a former professional baseball player and current husband, father, and professional who overcame 10 years of struggling in silence with opioid abuse to become an Ironman. His life changed the moment he asked for help and traded his shame for authenticity. He has turned keeping promises to himself and to his superpower to achieve incredible things and create deep, meaningful changes in his personal relationships and professional health and fitness endeavors. The strength is to the strength it took to survive the silent struggles of opioid abuse has become the strength it takes to thrive. He currently lives in the greater Seattle area with his wife and two young kids. He is sharing his story of inspiration, motivation, and lessons learned from his triumph to let others know that they are not alone and that anything is possible when you uncover your most authentic self. Wow. All right, Corey, how you doing?
All right. I'm good, Jarvis. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. Um, Great bio. You inspired me already.
Yeah, thank you.
uh, you're welcome. So just getting right into it. Which teams were you on in baseball?
Yeah. I mean, like most of us, and you're an athlete included, obviously, we all started, back in Little League and stuff, and then progressed through, middle school and high school, and then through college, the University of Kansas and New Mexico State. And then I was fortunate enough to be drafted by the Seattle Mariners way back in 2002, and I played a few years with them in their minor league system, Everett Aqua Sox and the Wisconsin Timber Rattlers and the San Antonio Missions. And then I got released. I was told at that point that I wasn't good enough, and I
Mm.
got released. And I had met my future wife at that point, and so that was the next thing that I was looking forward to, and we got married. But not too long after that, I had this feeling of regret when I got released from Seattle. I had opportunities to sign on with some other teams, but at that point in my life, I think, like so many of us, when you're in your young 20s, I don't know if you're mature enough to make some rational decisions.
Right.
And I had felt very much bitter about being a part of baseball in the business world. Once you go professional, it's not it's not necessarily for the love of the game anymore, and that's across the
Mhm.
board. You realize that it's a business, and that
Yeah.
uh, that decisions are made not on your behalf, but on the behalf of what's best for an organization. And so I decided at that point I didn't want to you know move forward and trying to sign on with another organization. And got married. And then when I felt that regret pop in, it's one of my first moments of really feeling like having a really hard, authentic conversation with my wife, because we've been married for 2 years and baseball
Mm.
was kind of behind us. And I had felt like, well, I need to see if I missed something here. But how do you bring that up to your wife and say, I want to go back to play baseball? You're
Right.
married, you're trying to build a life. And I
Right.
promise you that minor league baseball is not a place to make money.
Right.
So
Hmm.
it was kind of a tough conversation. It was really a tough conversation. And but like any spouse who has your best interest in mind, she was like, yeah, 100% behind you. So I proceeded to go to a couple workouts and tryouts with some organizations, and had some really good tryouts. But I was 2 years out of baseball, and so their best bet was telling me, you need to go play some independent ball to try and get some at bats and get back into it. So I signed on with the Lincoln Salt Dogs back in Lincoln,
Oh,
and played for 2 seasons with them until I had
nice.
another couple injuries that it just kind of it showed me the writing on the wall. I think I left that feeling like um, I gave it a go, and it just wasn't in my stars. But that was a really tough pill to swallow.
Hmm.
So yeah, so that's kind of my baseball background in a nutshell.
What position did you play in baseball?
Yeah, so I left. I went to school. I went to college as a pitcher,
Okay.
with the hopes of maybe playing a position too. I played shortstop in high school, but I quickly realized my freshman year that being just a pitcher, I don't mean to sound that in a negative way, but I felt like I had more athleticism than to just be on the mound.
Mm-hmm.
And so I hurt myself my freshman year and had shoulder surgery. And
Mm-hmm.
that kind of led me down the path of like, well, hey, do I want to continue to put that stress on my arm, or can I swerve and make a future in college baseball as a position player? And so I ended up leaving University of Kansas and walking on at New Mexico State with that goal in mind. So I ended up walking on at New Mexico State, playing shortstop my first year, and playing center field my first year, and shortstop my second year. And that's what
Mm-hmm.
I was drafted. I was drafted as a shortstop.
Nice, nice. Um, so getting back into that first question. So when you had to talk to your wife about like, hey babe, I don't think I'm ready to give up baseball yet. How do you can you remember how that conversation went?
Yeah, I can actually remember it very vividly. There's a handful of things that happen in your life that are vivid, and big moments like that.
Right.
Still, they're still burned into your memory. And um, I think I have realized that any hard conversation, it's hard to find the words. You're not
Right.
well practiced in having hard conversations. So trying to
Right.
find the words to communicate big emotions can be really
Mm-hmm.
tough. And that can make it awkward to start, or to even figure out how to start that conversation. And we'll get into some of the other hard conversations that I've had to have. But that was like one of the first ones I remember. And sitting there saying, hey, I need to tell you something, or I need to talk to you about something,
Mm.
and trying to find the confidence or the nerve to say, hey, this is I would like to make a big life change. And so
Right.
um I was sitting there trying to find the words, and she's like, what's wrong, what's going on? And I was like, it's not bad, I don't think, but I feel like I need to give this
Get it
another
off my
shot, or else I
chest.
will have regrets. And she sat there and listened, and was, met me the way that I thought she would. But at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, you never know when you bring up something big, how, people in your life will react.
Mm-hmm.
But she reacted the way that I think all of us hope to be met in a situation like that. And
Mm-hmm.
my wife was a high level athlete as well. She played volleyball at Michigan State, so she understands
Okay.
that
Okay.
competitiveness, and how this was part of our life, and how it was such a big part of our life, sports were. So yeah, so we had that conversation, and we quickly started to put a plan in place to how to make that happen. So
Nice, nice. Um, how would you prepare other baseball players leaving baseball full time?
well, I think I'll go back a little bit, Jarvis. In order to answer that question, I think that your listeners probably need to understand um, a little bit of my story, and how
Okay.
I left baseball, and what that did to me, or what I wasn't prepared for. And
Right.
that gets us into, honestly, it gets us into opioid abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when when uh, when I was done with the Salt Dog, so when my second stint was done, and the dream was, was over, the door was closing, the book was closing on that. Um, I had wrapped up my complete self identity was wrapped up in being a baseball player,
Right.
and this dream that I had since being a little kid of playing in the
Mm-hmm.
major leagues. And I don't think that obviously you're an athlete too. Like, sports aren't bad. Like, sports are really good. There's so many good
Mm-hmm.
things that come from being an
Yeah.
athlete. Um, but I think there's also the risk of finding all your value and your identity in that.
Mm-hmm.
And what makes that so difficult, I think, is that it becomes very fickle. It becomes very much like at the hands of other people. So your identity and self-confidence
Right.
is ultimately held by the people in charge of your career. I mean, you can only
Yes.
control yourself, and
Mm-hmm.
your performance to a point. You can really control your work ethic and how hard
Right.
you work for something, but you don't always have control of the final, product, or where you end up. And I think
Mm-hmm.
sports, as you move up from, little league and high school into college and professional, it becomes more and more not in your control. as far as maybe where you end up. There's just a lot of other factors at play.
Mm-hmm.
And finding your value and confidence, um, and who you see yourself as in just that identity
Mm-hmm.
is scary. It's scary because it can change on a dime, and that's kind of what happened in my case.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I I was playing for the Lincoln Salt Dogs, and I hurt my shoulder my first season. I dislocated my shoulder at the plate one
Mm.
night, and that evening, I mean, right after that happened, like it's kind of like, okay, I have this small window of trying to get back into organized ball, which means, for an organization, a
Right.
minor league organization, and that moment that happened to my shoulder is kind of like, well, I'm already at the older end of the spectrum, and now I have an
Right.
injury, and I think I'll probably need surgery, and so that became like, wow, like this may be the end of that. And so emotionally, right after this happened that evening, right after the game, I'm in a bad place. I'm like, well, I have this dream and goal, and I feel like, maybe, man, this might just, you know, put the nail in the coffin for me. And I was feeling pretty bad physically as well as emotionally. And after the game, I walk in the locker room, and a teammate just, said, "Hey, you're probably in some pain. Like, take this pill. This will help." And
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have any experience. That's a lie. I've had surgeries prior to that, so I've had pain
Right.
medicine. I've had,
Mm-hmm.
opioids. I didn't think of them or know them in that way. I just thought it as a prescription from a doctor, and I took it. Prior to that, I took my meds just like anybody else does. Like, they're meds from a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea if it's the same as a Tylenol or an ibuprofen. And so I didn't ask anything. I just took the pill, and once again, didn't know what it was. And that's kind of
Right.
silly to look back and not even ask a question, but I had no reason to. I never questioned anything about, medicine or pills or anything like that. It just wasn't
Mm-hmm.
on my radar. And so I took that pill, and within an hour, man, my shoulder didn't hurt, which was good, but also I felt better. I felt like a weight was lifted. Like I was, I
Mm.
mean, what an opioid does is it gives you a sense of of euphoria. It makes you feel, kind of forget things,
Mm.
and it lifts you up, I guess, is for the best
Mm-hmm.
way to say it, is that it makes you kind of like not worry. And so that was the first moment of taking this pill and thinking that, like, I don't just feel better physically, but I feel better emotionally, as well. It kind of took that depressed feeling, off my shoulders. So, long story short, I go back and I play again the next season. I have surgery. I play the next season, and I didn't come back the same after that surgery, and I kind of
Mm-hmm.
had to make a decision. I had an offer to take a job and to get me, into the professional world and start moving my life forward that way. Because I was at that point, I wasn't putting up any numbers. I wasn't, on the radar of any scouts. And
Right.
so I made the decision to, to take a job, and kind of, move on into the real world,
Right.
one might say, from sports or from baseball. And unfortunately, I made that move with the knowledge now that, that there are these pills that can help you cope with some pretty crappy feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And I had those pills on hand because of surgery after my first season, and I felt lost. I just felt lost when I moved on from baseball, and I didn't know, like we were talking about, that self identity, that self confidence, like who you find your value in, was
Mm-hmm.
gone. Like in a, like, just like that. Like, all of a sudden, I'm no longer a baseball player. I'm no longer following this dream. I am. I don't know who I am necessarily.
Right.
I'm kind of flailing for my own self identity at that point. And yeah, and these opioids kind of had a way of, helping me deal with that or cope with that in a very bad way. I'll realize, not too far down the road, that, man, this is, coping is not a strategy. And
Right.
that's so getting back to your question, what I would tell somebody like leaving baseball or leaving any sport when it's been such um, a big part, it's been the tapestry of your life. There's
Mm-hmm.
so much wrapped into it, is that, um, talk to somebody. You need to talk to somebody. Like mental health is this taboo thing where people talk, if you're going to say you need to go talk to a counselor or therapy, like I feel like there's so much judgment and uh it goes against some social norms. Like you feel weak for having to do that. But if there's one of the major lessons I've learned over this, decade plus long struggle in my life, is
Mm-hmm.
that you need to talk to people.
Yeah.
There's no shame in asking for help, or not even asking for help, but just going in and talking to a therapist, because we all have so many things in our lives that are that we could use some help trying to discuss and figure out. And
Mm-hmm.
and and it's kind of taboo to do that. I mean, you think about being an athlete, like, man, there's no shame in getting asking a coach for extra help, or for
Right.
getting a tutor in school, or
Mm-hmm.
taking you know like personal training. Like there's no taboo in that. Like you're seen as being strong, or like you're a go-getter, like you're
Right.
wanting to get better. But the moment you start talking about like addiction or mental health or anything like that,
Mm-hmm.
it becomes something that nobody really wants to discuss. So
Right.
I think like my number one thing for somebody who's at the end of a career is make sure you don't go at it alone. Like there's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot to
Mm-hmm.
unpack in you and what you've who you've seen yourself as, and who you've identified as for a long time. And I didn't have the skills to figure that out on my own, because I became pretty lost. I became pretty lost in not knowing who I was. And I know now in hindsight that, man, talking to somebody, talking to a therapist, and working through some of those things would have been really, really beneficial.
Right. Yeah, I really agree with that, what you were just saying about it seems very taboo to, talk to any counselor or mental health because it's a sign of weakness that most people think, but it's really not. I mean, I think once people age and start to understand that, dude, I don't know what to do with all these things, like I have to find some help. So just like reaching out to
Yeah.
someone, looking at their, credentials and things like that, and then making a decision for you and your family is probably the best thing to do.
Yeah.
Um,
I think the biggest thing too is when you find a therapist or somebody you can talk to, is there's an unbiased there. So it's you always have friends and family that you're always talking to friends and family, but when it comes to some of this really hard stuff,
mhm.
I think that it's sometimes really beneficial to be able to kind of for lack of a better term, like kind of vomit out like these things, these
Yeah.
struggles in your life. And then you have
Mhm.
all these pieces of a puzzle down, and a therapist is able to kind of help you like put that back together, and in a very unbiased way, just sit there and listen and kind of help you, think about it from the outside. And you don't get that necessarily when you're doing that with family or friends. Like there's a different dynamic at play.
Yeah, that's funny thing. Me and my wife just recently went to our first counseling session yesterday for the first time, and it's been amazing. Like you said, I vomited because I'm very open, transparent about like my story and stuff. So I was just talking. We even split our time up, 30 minutes, 30
Yeah.
minutes. We were just like, whoa, help me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
it gives you it's like a sense of freedom too, right? Like you have a
it
lot of stuff you've
does.
held in, and you haven't had a way to let that out, and being able to sit down with somebody and feel like unjudged, you can just say the things that are on your mind that maybe you haven't had the ability to anybody else.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, you kind of answered that following question already. Um, so who did you reach out to for help to help you
Yeah.
at that time?
So I'll fill in the gap real quick, because it took me 10 years to ask for help. Right. So this is a long struggle from early on. Like I said, I had learned that opioids kind of helped me. I use it. I thought I was using it like somebody would just have a drink. I thought that it was like just a way to kind of um, take the edge off at the end of the day. And it
Hmm.
wasn't something that, I mean, Jarvis, I'm from Lincoln, Nebraska. Uh, I never drank in high school. Like I was always
Right.
kind of a little bit put on the pedestal of like, he's a really good athlete. He's
Hmm.
really on the straight and narrow. Like um, I never, I know this now looking back and talking to people, like I was nobody ever thought that it could possibly be me who would end up with a opioid abuse problem, right?
Right.
It just wasn't on the radar. And
Mm-hmm.
same for myself. Like I saw myself that way too, very much like the straight and narrow. Like I, you know, how could I ever be the one to abuse drugs? And so early on, it was I tried to normalize it, like I'm just having a drink like anybody. Like I'm having a pill like somebody would have a drink, just to have a
Mm-hmm.
a beer at the end of the day to kind of take the load off. And the scary thing with opioids and with any drug really, including alcohol, is that like it will progress. Like so you have a pill here and there on the weekend to just kind of take the edge off or to help you cope with um, like I said, like the lack of understanding who I was and feeling like a little bit lost. And I felt like when I would take a pill, that would go away. Like that stress, that like uh the thing that I was trying to work through or cover up, like my lack of self-confidence and identity and trying to figure out my life,
Mm-hmm.
like it would go away. Like that feeling would kind
Right.
of go away. And it felt like a vacation away from like those hard feelings, not knowing how to discuss or think about those things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and over time, I learned that not only was it helping me, I mean, helping me, I put it in air quotes because it wasn't helping me at all. It was
Right.
helping me cope. It was helping me cope with things I didn't know how to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, when I was done with baseball, my wife went back to school. It was kind of like, okay, she helped me follow my dream. That was at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And now she wanted to go back to get her master's. So we're kind of switching places.
Right.
And at that time, I'm all of a sudden, I'm not a baseball player anymore. So I don't know who I am. A lot of my self-confidence, like I said, was tied up in that, and that's gone. And now
Mm-hmm.
my wife is going into this 4-year program for her master's degree. And she is now, diving headfirst into that. And
Mm-hmm.
because of that, now our relationship takes a little bit of a nosedive because, she's pouring into that and we have less time for ourselves.
Right.
And I am sitting there thinking to myself, thinking in my own head, because I'm not talking to anybody, like, is something wrong with me? Is like, now that I'm not a baseball player and she doesn't see that part of me, like, is she not attracted to me anymore? Was
Right.
our relationship based on that? I know that's,
Right.
in hindsight, you can say that's ridiculous to think that, but when you're struggling through something, it's really hard to think clearly about things. And you
Mm-hmm.
you see signs, you make a lot out of a little sometimes. And because
Mm-hmm.
you're not talking to anybody, you're able to just like, it just starts to snowball in your head. And so I'm sitting here thinking to myself, well, was that what she liked about me? The fact that I was going to be a major league baseball player, and now
Mm-hmm.
that is gone, like, has our relationship changed? But that's a hard
Right.
thing to talk about, so you don't talk about it, and you
Right.
just, so you start coping. And that's what I did. I started coping. I take a pill, a little more often, and then it over a course of a long time, Jarvis, it became um, something where I was seeking out those pills. And I had a back issue, which they prescribed me more. Man, we could go down this road of kind of the broken system back, back
Mm-hmm.
in the 2010s, and how easy it was to get your hands on opioids and how it was being prescribed. And man, I've watched a handful of documentaries that maybe shed some light on on just how
Right.
crazy it was. And
Mm-hmm.
and I take full responsibility for like my opioid abuse. And I also really now, through therapy and learning a lot about it, like, realize that there's a lot that's stacked against you too when it comes to that. There's you go to your doctor for trusted information. You think that's one place you can go where you're going to
Mm-hmm.
get like the truth. And in hindsight, I think that there was a whole kind of dirty mechanism in place, from the top down of these pharmaceutical drug
Oh,
makers,
yeah.
and how it was being, how they knew that abuse was happening and addiction was happening from these things, yet they were pushing harder and harder, and providers were prescribing more and more. And I
Mm-hmm.
I fell into that. I was prescribed, I mean, a ton of pills for a herniated disc, and that, I feel like, this was back in 2013. I feel like that
Mm-hmm.
was kind of the breaking point of when I was prescribed like 270 of these pills that are high
Mm-hmm.
strength. And that that was kind of like um this this moment where it went from me feeling like this is something I'm just doing on occasion to something that became more and more a part of my life. And I asked for help at that point. I mean, I
Hmm.
kind of brought it up to the doctor who's prescribed them to me and told them, I don't feel right about this. Like, don't get me wrong. I like the feeling it was giving me. It was helping me cope with a lot of things I hadn't dealt with still. But
Hmm.
I knew that there's some like that this could go sideways. And so I thought by just bringing that up to a doctor, that it might sound an alarm. And instead, I was met with, well, you don't show any of the signs of somebody who is addicted or abusing these. And I kind of felt like, well, there's an alarm going off in my head. But if the doctor's telling me that I'm okay, then I guess I'm okay, and I can keep taking
Right.
these things, right? Like I didn't really want to not take them, because at that point I felt like, well, I like how they make me feel. I'm feeling like it's helping me cope with a lot of things in my life.
Mhm.
And if the doctor says that there's not a problem with it, then there's not a problem. But at the same time, I knew I wasn't taking them just for pain anymore. So there's just so many ways to normalize things, or make you feel like, you can take all these, you know, Google, like, how do you know if you're an addict or if you're abusing drugs?
Right.
And like, there's 10 questions. And if you tick 6 of the boxes, well, then you're an addict. And if you tick
Hmm.
5, then you're abusing drugs. And if you tick 4, then you don't have a problem. Like, there's so many ways to rationalize, what you're going through.
Right.
And unfortunately, I didn't have examples of myself. So I saw, the Brett Favre, back in the day, who, came out and said, I'm abusing pain meds. And
Mm.
then he had an entourage of people help him get help. Right. And it didn't seem like a big
Right.
deal. It's kind of like a blurb on Sports Center of, hey,
Right.
Brett Favre checked himself into rehab, but then, within a month he's back at training camp. Right. So it's like, okay, well, that doesn't seem like a big deal necessarily. And then the other
Hmm.
example you see out there, people, on with opioid abuse is like the guy on the street who just overdosed on heroin and is homeless or dead. Like those are
Right.
the two extremes. But it's really hard to find an example of myself who struggled in this area of, like, my life hasn't fallen apart yet.
Hmm.
My relationships haven't fallen apart. I haven't lost my job, but at the
Hmm.
same time, um, you know, I I know something's not right, but you feel very lonely because you can't find examples of people who look like you or having experiences like you.
Right.
Um, so when I asked for help, it was a long time. It was a decade, and nobody in my life knew. I mean, pills are easy to hide. My wife had no
Hmm.
idea. I was very high functioning.
Hmm.
Like I said, I kept my job. I, for the most part, kept my relationships. Were they real anymore? No, they weren't real, because I wasn't being real with the people in my life. Like, I was hiding this massive thing from them. So, when you do that, and when you're not authentic, when you're not honest, when you don't have integrity, like, it destroys your personal perception of yourself. So who you see in the
Hmm.
mirror, like, you can no longer look at that person, because you know
Right.
what you're hiding.
Hmm.
And you can also not be real with the people in your life. Like, if you're hiding something that big, your relationships aren't real. Like, you are interacting with people, um, and using a facade. And so they're
Right.
not really interacting with you. It's a facade of who you want them to interact with. And
Mm.
um, and that's not real. And yeah, and I had that struggle for a long time of, like, if I could just quit these, then nobody would have to know. Nobody would have to
Mm.
know that this happened.
Right.
But then I also struggled with the fact that, well, you can't go through all this and then pretend that, like, your relationship with your wife is real. Like, that when you're sitting on together, when you're 75 years old together, if she doesn't know this about you, this massive thing
Right.
in your life, then that
Hmm.
relationship is not real.
Right.
And I laid in bed for, for years, every night, trying to say this to my wife, like,
Mm.
just tell her, like, what you're going through, like, ask for help. Um, but just like anything else, like we were talking about before, it's hard to find those words. It's hard to find the
Right.
confidence and the words to say, because you're so worried about how you're going to be met. Like, what's that mean to tell your wife that you're abusing drugs? Like, how do you say that without just
Right.
saying it like that? Because it's
Exactly.
not that easy.
Yeah. It's like you have that weird feeling in your throat. Your stomach feels weird. You want to say it, and just uh, yeah, you just have to say it somehow, like um, through any
Yeah,
form of communication. It seems like.
and it took almost a year. So when I asked for help, um, we had moved out to the Seattle area, and my wife and kids were getting ready to move from Nebraska out to Seattle. And I just felt like I can't ask my wife to move out here and her not know this, because what I was at that point, I was worried. I mean, my abuse got worse and worse to the point where I was like, what is it? What is my future? Like, what's going to happen to me? Like, when you're stealing pills, like as I was doing, like that's a felony. Like you go to jail for that.
Mm.
Like it's no longer, for so long I could normalize it and be like, it's not a big deal.
Right.
Um, but at a certain point, it progresses where it is a big deal, and
Hmm.
there's consequences for it. Not only your mental health, my mental health, but like also like if I were to be caught stealing pills from a friend, from a family member, it doesn't take much, and that's a felony. And so
Right.
you can only normalize it for so long. But I just felt like I couldn't ask my wife to move out here and not let her know about this, because she would have no support system once we got out here. We
Mm.
didn't know anybody. So, so as selfish as I was being with like, with my opioid abuse, and I say selfish, like it's not the truth. Like it was, there's so many things that go into it. I didn't do it because I wanted to be selfish. Like
Right.
I just, um, it was a learned coping mechanism, and those drugs change your brain. And I learned that through therapy of unpacking so much stuff, is like it changes the chemistry of your brain. So I never
Hmm.
wanted to take those pills. Like I would like turn my brain off in order to take a pill. I'd be like, don't do it, don't do it. Like this is not who you are. But then I'd take a pill because I'd be able to turn my brain off and take it.
Mm.
Um, so before my wife moved out here, my brother and I moved a U-Haul out, and we're moving into the house that we rented. And I wake up the following morning and I just couldn't sleep. I just had this terrible, terrible feeling in my stomach of like, you you need help. Like you need help.
Mm.
And so I drove to get us some coffee, my brother and I a coffee. And I Googled an opioid hotline. And I'd never said anything out loud to anybody before that I needed help or that I was abusing opioids. And so I called this hotline, and the guy on the other end answered, and I'm bawling. It's like, it's dark. I was 5 a.m. It's
Mm.
dark. It's raining. It's like the perfect storm of like, it's Seattle, and
Right.
the winter time, it's miserable out. Like, I just felt like this setting was the setting spoke to the moment I was in, honestly. Like, it's dark, it's dreary, it's rainy. And that's exactly how I felt. I just felt like I have nothing left. I'm in a dark place. And so somebody answered, and they just said, this is so and so. How can I help? And I just, like, through tears and bawling, I'm just like, I've been abusing opioids for 10 years, and I'm scared, and I need help. Like I need help. I just need to say it to somebody. And the guy asked where I was located, and I told him where I was, and he's like, okay, well, I don't service your area, but I'll transfer you to the people who do. And I'm like, okay, thank you. And he transfers me, and it's a dead line. Like, there's nobody there. It's not a working number that he transferred me to.
Hmm.
Um, and so that was like devastating. But at
Mm.
the same time, like, there was a confidence, like at that moment of like, I just said it out loud to somebody. I told somebody like the truth. So I need to tell somebody. So I rushed home to my brother. My younger brother is 10 years younger than me and has looked up to me forever. And I woke him up at 5:30 in the morning, and he's kind of like, "What the hell's going on?" And I'm bawling, and I'm like, I need to tell you, I need to tell you this." And he's like, "What?" And I'm just like, I need help. Like, I've been abusing opioids for 10 years, and I'm scared, and
Mm.
I just need to tell somebody, like, I need help with accountability, blah blah blah. And that was the moment that I asked for help. And honestly, that's the moment that my life changed. The moment that I said it out loud, told
Hmm.
somebody what was happening in my life, and knew that like somebody else knew now. It wasn't just my own secret, that
Right.
like this wasn't going to just go away now. I couldn't like back out of this and be like, no, never mind. I'm just joking. I'm good.
Right.
Like
Right.
that's no longer an option.
Hmm.
And so from that point on, that was almost 3.5 years ago. I was over 3.5 years ago. Um, yeah, like I flew home a couple of days later, and told my wife, um, which was a terrible experience, also an amazing experience. Like, it ran the
Hmm.
gamut of emotions. Like,
Right.
I
Yeah.
all of a sudden took this and put this on her shoulders, that she had no idea. and now she has to know about this. But she
Right.
has to know about this. There's no other choice. Like, she has to know about this. And so we had some really, really hard conversations, and we put a game plan together as far as like how to get help and what this meant, and trying to understand it all, and through
Hmm.
therapy and counseling and all those things. It was yeah, that was the moment I asked for help. So yeah, that's kind of how it went down. And I wasn't met initially with help. And I think that's the story of a lot of people who ask for help, especially in like
Hmm.
drug abuse and addiction, is it's really hard to find help.
Yeah.
um, and that's how I found it too. But um, yeah, so that's the moment I asked for help. It was almost 3.5 years ago.
Awesome. Glad you're able to reach out and not keep it in anymore. Because sometimes it's just great to try to, ask for help from your brother and then calling that hotline. And I felt like I was in the movie with you right now. I was like just
Yeah.
picturing everything right now. I was like, whoa. Um, how big is the opioid issue in the sport of baseball, you think?
I'm removed from it for a while now, right? I
Right.
haven't been there, but I think that it's funny because I don't have my experience prior to me taking that pill,
Hmm.
like the 6 years before that led up to
Right.
that, when I was started, professionally, was, I wasn't necessarily looking. I was naive. Like I told you, like
Right.
I didn't abuse drugs. I barely drank. It wasn't something that was a normal part of my life. And yet I'd hear plenty of my teammates talk about like taking greenies or yellow jackets. And these are all names for pills, which I didn't understand what they were. I kind of thought, well, maybe they're just steroids, or I didn't know.
Right.
Like, there's something going on here that's probably not on the up and up, but I never delved into it because it was never something that I cared to dabble in. And
Right.
so, it's one of those things where I'm sure it was pretty damn prevalent. And you know when you're playing professionally, and you're reaching for these goals and your dreams, and there's a lot of money on the line at a certain
Yeah.
point, um people do what they can to get them to the next level, and whether that's
Hmm.
performance enhancing drugs or whatever it might be. And on the same token, there's a whole lot of pressure that goes into it too. And there's a lot of
Hmm.
pain you're playing through. So I
Oh,
think,
yeah.
players are being prescribed either legit or illegitimately, pain meds to keep them on the field, to keep them
Hmm.
playing. Um, and the crappy side effect of that is that not only are they keeping you on the field, but then you're using those pills to cope with the pressures that go along with professional sports, and that kind of thing. So I can't speak to how it is these days. Like I said, I'm
Right.
removed from that now, but I that kind of setting is a breeding ground for abuse of a lot of different things. I think there's a lot of
Hmm.
pressure, and there's a lot of people not asking for help or understanding their mental states, and I think that
Right.
that's just kind of a perfect storm for people abusing things, or finding ways to cope with the stresses, and that kind of thing. So
Hmm. Um, do you see yourself talking to like former teams you played to warn them and encourage them with your story?
I hope to. I mean, that is actually, this this thing that I held as a secret for so long, that I
Right.
didn't want to share with anybody, that I couldn't tell anybody. On the other side of it, like once I like said it out loud and asked for help, like it took the power away from this thing. Like, this thing like held
Hmm.
so much power over me because I couldn't say it out loud. And it's like a lot of things. Like, the moment you say it out loud and admit something, like, it takes a lot of that power away from that thing.
Hmm.
And in this case, being clean for 3.5 years has given me so much confidence, and it's allowed me to look back on it and now not see it as something that I'm ashamed of, because there's so much shame wrapped up into drug abuse or anything like that. Like, you feel so much shame because you're not
Hmm.
doing something, um, you know you're doing something bad. And not only do you feel like you're doing something bad, like, you've become something bad. Like, I think that's the
Right.
difference between guilt and shame. Is like, guilt is like you did something bad and you feel bad about that, but shame is like you've become something bad. And
Mm.
I think that's addiction and abuse makes you feel that way, like you've become something bad. It's hard to see anything good in yourself because that's all you see in yourself. But I didn't want to share any of that. Like, I was so ashamed of it that, man, the last thing I wanted people to know is that about me.
Right.
But after coming through it and being on this side of it, I realized that like no longer is there shame involved in it, and I'm happy to talk about it. But that I see it as like, holy crap, man, like you should be really freaking proud of yourself, because it's really hard. It is really hard to ask for help. It's really hard to get help. It's really hard
Mm-hmm.
to overcome an opioid abuse. Like there are plenty of stories of people who their stories don't go my way. That things go to a point of whether that's overdose or just it takes your life away. Like it takes everything
Mm-hmm.
in your life away. And so I feel very fortunate in that. And I also feel like because that I have overcome this, that like now it's, and I don't feel shame about it. Like I need to share it. Like there has to be a bigger purpose than like,
Mm-hmm.
this was just part of my life. You're through it and good for you. Like that can't be it. Like there has to be something bigger, as far as like, okay, you felt so alone and isolated. Like your story can help people feel not so alone and isolated, and let
Right.
them know that there's hope, that you can
Mm-hmm.
overcome this. Like, so yeah, so my hope is that that is my goal. Is like I feel like it's given me a purpose. Honestly, I feel like
Mm-hmm.
to be able to share my experience with, whether that's young athletes or people our age, my age. Like I just feel like there's a lot of people struggling out there in the gray area, where there's opioids, drugs, any substance, food. Like there's all kinds of ways that people cope, and it
Yeah.
can be very lonely. It can be very lonely, and the
Mm-hmm.
only way to kind of help, I feel like, is to let people know that like you're not struggling alone. Like you are not the
Right.
only one who has these struggles, and that there is strength in knowing there's a community of people who also struggle, and are okay with being authentic and telling their truth, because at the end of the day, that is what helps people, is to know that they're not alone, and there's hope. So
Mm-hmm.
yes, that was the long answer to yes. I do absolutely hope that I can help by telling my story and what I've learned to maybe help somebody either not have to go through it, or help them out of a situation that they're in.
Right. Yeah. Um, Last question. What is an Ironman and how did you get started?
Okay, so an Ironman is like an endurance race. It's a 2.4-mile swim, followed by a 112-mile bike ride, and then followed
Mm.
by a marathon, 26.2-mile run. And I had remembered seeing this on TV every year. There's
Wait,
Ironman World Championships in Hawaii, and it's on
wait.
CBS, I believe, NBC, CBS, I can't remember. But it's this hour-long show, maybe 2 hours, and it's like these stories of incredible inspiration. And not only like the distances that people traverse, but just the stories of people overcoming unbelievable odds and obstacles
Mm-hmm.
in order to do this race. And I remember seeing this back in like 2007, and this was like the beginning stages of my opioid abuse. And I remember
Mm-hmm.
watching it and just thinking, "Holy crap, this is like incredible! Like how do people possibly do this?"
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I thought to myself, like maybe one day, but I was also kind of like at that time I was, going down some really dark paths, and
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have much confidence in myself. And but anyways, that stuck with me. That stuck with me. This race did, this Ironman thing. And so once I asked for help, 3.5 years ago, I truly felt like, man, if I could do that, if I could ask for help and beat this, like there was nothing I can't do. Like I have no excuses. Like if I can beat that, then especially anything physical, any kind of physical endeavor is like, man, that's just mental. Like that is a mental thing. Like your body
Mm-hmm.
can go much further than you think it can. It's all about your mental strength. And
Right.
so I kind of felt like, man, this is a perfect way for me to come full circle. Like I, I need to do something where um, I can prove to myself that I can be accountable to myself. Because for
Mm.
so long, I was not keeping promises to myself by taking pills. If I was taking a pill,
Right.
it's something I didn't want to do, yet I was doing it. So it was like com- completely destroying my self-confidence. My
Mm-hmm.
definition of self-confidence is like if you keep promises to yourself on a regular basis, like that's what builds self-confidence, like
Mm.
keeping promises to yourself. So for so long I was not doing that, and I felt like, okay, in order to like come full circle, you need to prove to yourself that you can keep promises to yourself. And I thought, well, there's no better way to do that than to take on something that is extremely difficult, and that in order to get there, I need to put a plan in place and keep that training plan promised to myself every day.
Mm-hmm.
So I told my wife, I was like, I want to do this I want to be an Ironman and I need to put a plan in place. And she was like, yes, absolutely. This is something you should do. Like, you seem passionate, like this is important. So do it. So I found a plan and I signed up for a race. And the first, my first training session, I had to run 4 miles and I about died. Like like literally about, like, it's never something I was, into. Like, this is all
Right,
new to me. And so 4 miles in, I'm like, my knees are like killing me. Like, honestly, it was a terrible experience. But at the end of the
right,
4 miles, I was like, hell yes, I just ran 4 miles.
right, right.
But at that point, you're like, okay, I just ran 4 miles. Now, how do I get from 4 miles to being able to do, this 140.6 mile race?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the cool thing about it is it was by keeping promises on a regular basis. Like, if you just kind of trust the plan and follow the plan and keep that promise, like, you'll get there. There's a plan out there. Follow the
Mm-hmm.
plan and keep those promises every day. And sure enough, 8 months later, I was on the starting line of the Ironman Florida down in Panama City, standing on the beach, getting ready to do this race. And at that point,
Nice.
I was like it was just a really cool experience because it 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 solidified the idea in my head of keeping promises build self-confidence, and you can achieve
Mm,
pretty damn amazing things by just keeping promises to yourself. And so yeah, and it was a super cool experience, and I felt like it kind of brought my whole story a little bit full circle of, like, from abusing opioids and not feeling like I had any self-confidence and not being able to keep a promise to myself to doing something that I thought probably was impossible.
mm,
And so yeah, it meant so much more to me than the race. It was all like,
right.
I felt so grateful for being there, for having put in the hours to feel confident to do the race, but also, like, to be there coming from the background of using opioids for so long. Like, it just felt like, um yeah, I just felt really fortunate to be in that place. And then pretty damn amazing afterwards when you cross that line and realize that you've just done something that you didn't think you could do.
Right. That's amazing. Yeah, I always like watching. I like to watch the CrossFit stuff when they're doing
Yeah,
like
yeah. Oh, it's
lift the
crazy
pull-ups and then
stuff.
going up. I was like, dang, how do you do
Oh, yeah,
that?
the muscle ups or whatever they're called. It's
Yeah,
incredible.
muscles up. Yeah, yeah. But yeah, that's incredible story. I'm sure a lot of people are going to benefit from hearing that and just making sure they're asking for help and taking the steps and making the plan like you did in Ironman and sticking to it each day and promising yourself what you need to do each and every day so that you can complete your goal. And I
Yeah.
mean, that's the best way to wrap it up. Thank you everybody for listening in to Guide Every Moment with Corey and Jarvis. I hope everyone have a great day.